Totally. My computer's never done that before, and then my Skype comes up and it's like, oh, we've updated your Skype. Oh, thank you.
Well, it's not the first time the conference followed you, right?
This is a Mac, by the way. It's what I deserve. Okay, well, I really hope it doesn't happen again. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah.
Well, look, I was saying something about Bitcoin which was incoherent anyway, so let's start it this way. There's kind of two camps in Bitcoin. There's a legitimist camp. Oh god, this is really overgeneralizing, but there's a certain legitimist camp which is saying, well, we have to pass through. It's kind of reformist in nature. We have to pass through the institutions with Bitcoin. We have to somehow get them to affix their stamps and labels and their papers to what we do and kind of enshrine it as a valid social activity approved to kind of both help it tie into, what do we say, like the remnants of the legacy banking system, and achieve its kind of like, I don't know, whatever, some synthesis with it. And then also something like, this also helps mom and pop businesses who must act in the fight market adopt Bitcoin. That's the kind of first programmatic thrust. And then there's a totally kind of alternative programmatic thrust, which is, what are you talking about? This is the direct instrumentality of co-option, of degradation of the technology, of its like instruction or I don't know, like anyway, as a means of surveillance and control and domination. You're giving the system why participate at all. And these two camps are kind of like, as you would expect, the anarchist libertarian camp is dramatically undercapitalized. It doesn't have strong friends. There's not a lot of money to be made in holding the position, and so it's a kind of dwindling camp, which only has occasional outbursts of brilliance. And then this bigger camp gains more and more and more interested parties, businesses, we could say things like politicians, crooks, sovereign states, and then eventually you get a kind of overinflated Bitcoin, which threatens to be something that isn't Bitcoin at all. And so now I think this ends up telling you something about the different modalities of capitalist thought. And we can go further into any one of those camps, but to set up the problem for you that way, yeah. You want me to go further?
Well, no, yeah, I mean, that was a good explanation. I mean, a lot of people who have adapted Bitcoin are comfortable with identifying as crypto-anarchists. So I was wondering if you could explain to us the intersections between crypto-anarchy and agorism.
Oh, wow. Well, okay, well, I admit that I'm not like natively or in any authentic sense an agorist, and that I don't really kind of truck with like Austen-Scene agorism, or, I mean, I hang out with people who claim to be and who are, by any evidence, seem to be involved in counter-economics, but I guess I would say that counter-economics and crypto-anarchy are hand-in-hand when you're using disintermediating digital technologies to hide your economic or even just speech or political activities from state or corporate surveillance, and are avoiding certain reporting requirements or things like that. So the two really work together. Let's say like an agorist can use Bitcoin or other crypto-anarchist practices to better practice agorism.
Sure. Well, I mean, I asked that because recently, well, I don't know how recent the interview was, but you told the dude that was interviewing you that you like to radicalize people and ask them to practice counter-economics. And I was just curious as to what effect agorism has had on your current philosophical or political convictions.
Oh man, well, I mean, in terms of like the idea of like practicing outside the state, being like embracing these ideas of like, what do we have? We can non-industrialist anarchists, agorists. The only advantages that we have are that we can move stealthily. We can move behind the scenes. Power and corporate power aren't aware of us. We have celerity. Agorism informs a certain kind of activism, and then like this creates a feedback loop. So I suggest to people, like with something like dark web, disappear, go dark, avoid the state. I mean, this seems to be a very like valid or useful mechanism for kind of like building our own movement, if you want to call it that. So I guess that answers the question, but maybe you wanted something more specific.
No, that's good enough. Maybe you can go into what led you to anarchism. What path did Cody Wilson take to finally be comfortable enough to identify as an anarchist?
Oh man, well, you know, for a long time I didn't want to use the word. Like when you read Foucault, he talks about state phobia as if it's some kind of like, pathology or something. But if you come out of like the liberal reaction to like the New Deal and everything, and start to realize, oh, okay, the state and its its bundle of practices, if we don't use the word state, about intervention and control and command, all lead toward like a radically unfree world. And then if you see things like, well, why do I have to have practice? So I read a lot about like other people, about economics and about state as a practice through the centuries, and then I discovered the critical school, the Frankfurt School of critical theory. And these people were all preoccupied with the idea that like advanced capitalism, instead of like leading to this utopia of freedom of thought and action and relative like luxury and abundance, instead we were getting things like technological domination, a domination of nature and the individual, and things like monothought and the reduction of thought. And these guys were practicing in like the 60s, so recognizing like so we recognize, okay, yeah, we're going to have to adopt radical politics. And that radical politics, for me, ended up being a kind of techno-anarchism.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, some of us, I think, in this room specifically, sort of started out as probably the most, cliche movement into anarchism, like, minarchist, supporting Ron Paul, running as a state delegate, trying to get people into the, national convention to reduce government to its proper size. That all almost kind of seems like a right-wing approach into anarchism. Sometimes you identify as a leftist. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that accurate?
Well, I think, there's some tie-in here with agorism, which is kind of leftist as well in its scope. But no, I would say that some of those, the story that you tell about, again for Ron Paul, and just a nostalgia for a limited American government and stuff. These are things like that I share too, and are in my background and the backgrounds of my friends. And so that, I don't want to act like it's not part of my life as well. And I think, like, whatever, all roads lead to Rome, man. So I don't think by calling it left-wing or right-wing, we may not be doing anything analytically useful, but it's an interesting story. Maybe it tells more about you, but like how much you value an individual against the kind of needs of the community or something. But I flirted with with neoliberal dogmas back when I was in high school and college too. I mean, fine, but as long as we end up getting at a place where we all kind of agree that the state as a bundle of practices is really kind of terrible, or should be kind of opposed in meaningful ways. Or if we can say things like, well, economic and technological hegemony is this really terrifying monster, and how can we kind of create practices which reroute or pull it into itself in its own destruction, then they're really having the same conversation. And I hope that I'm not sounding like a heretic. Maybe without defining rightism, we can say leftism is, in the end, just becomes something about, leftism is more about like command and control, a sense of trying to solve something like social and economic injustices, which is great, a kind of overriding concern with equality. But in the end, there's no problem with direct intervention, direct coercion, a kind of fetish for hierarchies and organizations. And then the more radical you get, the more willing you are to use violence and kind of radically plan things. Like that kind of leftism is something of a relic that I'd like to leave, in the 20th and 21st century.
Yeah, I feel that. I mean, I'm totally beyond. Personally, I'm totally beyond like seeking change through the traditional parliamentary political, in the traditional parliamentary political sense. I mean, I think that real change occurs through post-political direct action. Without reverting to a status and trying to act violently against it. Although some justify that if you did act violently against the state, it really would be in self-defense since they're the aggressors to begin with. So without going into the aggression,
that's a whole question, and I don't know.
Sure. Well, I mean, how does in moving forward, what can we do? I mean. How does one turn revolutionary thought into revolutionary action?
I mean, that's a word that I think we should still hold to, the revolution. But, it might be good to temper these thoughts with recognizing that we live in a historical moment where traditional revolution, as conceived, especially in the Marxist tradition, just is not possible, is not achievable. And that's notwithstanding these so-called Jasmine revolutions and Arab Springs and everything that we've been watching. We have to think about that we live in a world or a world that's fast approaching, of total police power, of absolute calculation, total surveillance, something like an omniscience. And it's approaching that. It's not there now. It's kind of in its comical, awkward growth stage where, despite its best intentions, it only ends up, kind of making a farce of itself. But you can see how these tools have been building themselves, and how these organizational powers within IC and the kind of deep state are assembling themselves. And it's much bigger than a kind of industrial economic problem that might lead to the kind of economic utopia we all agree with. There's a real problem of power. And rather than talk about revolution and taking back power and reorganizing power, we have to think a little bit deeper, I think. And we have to think about how do you destroy power?
Sure. Yeah, that's a $1 million question.
And if we can start there, and there's a ton of hops and jumps to get there, and maybe I'm not even phrasing the question the right way. I mean, who am I? Don't listen to me. What are you doing here? But if we can think of things that way, how to oppose the hegemonic tide, maybe that's more useful than a kind of direct revolutionaryism, or some type of like purposeful caricature or I don't know, these things end up becoming just farces of themselves. So if we can think about power conditions, and how to destroy power conditions, all right, now this helps us narrow down the kinds of projects or the kinds of people with which we can associate, and perhaps can concretely help us direct activity. Did you want something more specific than that?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I guess what I see is, I mean, with your creation of, the software for the 3D printed gun and everything, that seems to me to be a revolutionary act. And sometimes we sort of get discouraged as anarchists. It's a lonely world full of statists. And it's like, what can we do? What is a revolutionary action? To me, a revolutionary action can be as much as growing a garden, you know what I mean? A revolutionary action is calling on a cadre member rather than the police. Is that something that's in line with what you're into?
I think it's really useful, and it recognizes what we're all kind of aware of, which is that even if we oppose whole columns of the system, we're still somewhat pressed into it, or we're complicit with it. Oh well, what's the easiest way for me to solve my problem? Well, I should call the police. Yeah, like dependencies, counter dependencies. In the end, don't lead away from the situation you're trying to lead away from. So yeah, I think everything you're talking about, is in the main destructive, or if you want to say revolutionary. I'm just trying to say, as we traditionally conceive the revolution in this kind of like ideal form, this may not be as useful anymore, because you might be sitting around waiting for a long time, as so many people are doing. So maybe do away with the idea of capital R revolution, and kind of come up with a certain insurgent, even schizophrenic set of techniques which recognize that, look, I shop at Walmart sometime, but I'm totally ready to short circuit the whole thing if it's in my power.
Well, yeah, I like the idea of evolution, not revolution. Even though agorism is, revolutionary market anarchism. I mean, and it's eclectic also. I mean, Konkin talked about, we're going to eventually have to team up with people who you can identify as non-proprietarian. You know what I mean? Our evolution past the state isn't necessarily one path. It's a lot of paths working in cooperation with one another and competition with one another as a multi-generational goal to evolve past the state. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think broadly this is true. I mean, this kind of historical description, I can't disagree with it. And it's useful to think in these terms. And I'm certainly no captain, no block captain of revolution or anything. I just think I realized at some point the way I'm thinking of things helped me do what I was doing. So I just advocate for a kind of critical reevaluation of the traditional terms that we've been borrowing for the past 200-300 years, from Marx, from Hayek, from even Mises, and maybe even from Kant.
Cool, awesome. Well, I think we might open it up for a Q&A, just in case anyone has any questions for Cody. I'm sure someone does, but I guess before we do, is there anything that we didn't touch on tonight that you'd like us to walk away with? This thing keeps freezing.
2,000 miles away.
Where is it?
I've been recording for 15 minutes. 15
Hey,
minutes
okay.
and 14 seconds.
So he'll come back on and